I get that not from clinical studies, but by reading user reviews. And the neurohackers report that vinpocetine reduces brain fog and mental fatigue. Most experience improved focus, memory, and even an improved sense of well-being. It has an effect on short, working, and long-term memory, so that you can remember things like names, phone numbers, and life events and stuff. So it doesn't matter if you're work or at school, vinpocetine can help with things like learning and memory. You should be able to start noticing the difference within a week of taking it.
Welcome back to Wellness for Life. I'm your host, Niki Wolf, and today's episode is packed with insights on nootropics, especially a powerful ingredient called vinpocetine, which has such incredible benefits for brain health and so much more. We're going to explore how it works, its potential to support cognitive function, and why it's a valuable addition to certain supplements. If you're interested in enhancing mental clarity, focus, and overall brain health, this episode is for you. And as a special thank you, we'll be sharing an exclusive 15% off coupon at the end of the episode. So hang on for that. But I'd love to do an introduction on our guest today, David Tomen, the author and founder behind NeurotropicsExpert.com. He's written the popular books Head First, the complete guide to healing and optimizing your brain with nootropic supplements, and Secrets of the Optimized Brain. And he runs the Nootropics Expert YouTube channel. David has become one of the most trusted sources for information on nootropic supplements. And we are so excited to have him here. Welcome, David. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. I was searching the webs when I was, trying to explore a little bit more about vinpocetine, came across your video, and you just explain things in such an easy to understand way. You go into the deep dive. And so that's very much what we're here for today. But before we dive in to what are nootropics and specifically vinpocetine, I'd love to get to know your journey a bit better and how you got into this field.
Yes. I've been struggling with focus and just basically focus all of my adult life. I got out of business school and I got into the cosmetics business, and then I ended up helping build the first cellular telephone company in the Caribbean, and I've lived in several countries, and I always ended up in an executive position one way or another. And when you're in an executive position, the boss sits you down once a year and gives you a performance report, right? How you're doing. And so every year he would sit me down and, David, you're a fantastic salesperson. You're a great executive. You're good. People love working with you, but you've got to learn how to focus. And the next year is, David, you're a good salesperson. You're a great executive. You've got to learn how to focus. And so I went, and this went on year after year after year. And I was devastated because I couldn't get promoted to the top position like I wanted to. And I went out and I bought the books on how to focus, and I bought the books on how to be a better executive, and I could not get it. I thought it was a moral failing. I thought it was my fault. And then fast forward to, this is about 18 years ago now. I moved to Miami and I met this gorgeous blonde girl on North Miami Beach. And within 6 months, we got married. And the first year that we were together, Lara saw what was going on, and she said, there's a psychiatrist in Palm Beach I want you to meet. And it turns out this guy was a rock star. He sat me down in his office, and within 10 minutes, he said, you're adult ADD and you have PTSD. And for adult ADD, he prescribed Ritalin. The very first day that I took Ritalin, it was like somebody turned the lights on in my brain. For the first time in my life, I could focus. And I went, oh, that's what this is like. This is what, quote unquote, normal people feel like. And it worked fantastic. I mean, it just changed my life. And within a couple of years, however, I started growing tolerant to Ritalin. And I panicked. And I'm going, I finally find something that's going to work and it's going to stop working. I don't think so. I got to figure this thing out. Now, mind you, there were no books on this back then. There were no websites on this back then. I was reading clinical studies to find out how Ritalin worked. And I found out that it was a dopamine reuptake inhibitor. And I had no idea what that meant, but I saw the word dopamine and I thought, well, maybe I don't have enough dopamine in my brain. How do I fix that? And I found out that L-Tyrosine was a precursor to dopamine. If you took L-Tyrosine, it boosted dopamine. And during my research, I also found that brain cell signaling was a problem with people with ADD and ADHD. And that's largely dependent on acetylcholine. So how do you increase acetylcholine? I found out that CDP-Choline combined with ALCAR could increase acetylcholine. So there was a GNC around the corner from where we were living at the time. And I got some L-Tyrosine, CDP-Choline, and ALCAR, brought it home, started using it. Ritalin started working again. Each time I took Ritalin, I would use those supplements. And then I'm on instant release Ritalin. So when you're on a stimulant like that, typically you crash later on in the day when the stimulant wears off. I found out that if I took these supplements again at 4:00, I didn't crash. I was able to lower my dose from 30 milligrams to 20 milligrams twice a day. Never again grew tolerant to it. And Ritalin keeps on working. And I don't crash later on in the afternoon. So when we're done this, about an hour after we're done this, I'll take my afternoon nootropics and I'll just keep on working in through to the early evening. So that was my introduction to nootropics. Now, mind you, I never heard the word nootropic back then. I just found out that there was dietary supplements that help the human brain. Now, fast forward a little bit more, and I ended up in the ER. And I was deathly ill. And my wife thought I was having a heart attack. That's why she took me to the hospital. It turned out it wasn't my heart. For some reason, I had suddenly become hypothyroid. And that is a whole other story that we could spend an hour talking about. But one of the things that happened during this time was complete memory loss. And I mean, total memory loss. I went to 2 different neurologists who tested me for early onset Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, and I got perfect on their tests. And they looked at me and said, David, we don't know what's wrong with you. We can't help you. And so it was back to reading clinical studies to find out how memory worked in the human brain and the supplements that could help that. And it took about 2.5 years before I finally got my memory working again. My brain was working well. My thyroid was I had enough thyroid hormone in my system that I was feeling good. And I started copywriting. I had been in marketing and I decided to focus on one thing. I was just going to write copy. And I started writing copy for a supplement company in England that had a nootropic stack. And I was writing these advertorials, and it occurred to me that when you write a sales letter, as you know, Niki, you've got to back it up with clinical studies. I mean, you can't just spout this stuff off. You have to tell people where you're getting this information from, and you're not just lying to them. And I realized that nobody else, it was really difficult to find this information. And I thought that what the world needs is a website like Nootropics Expert where you could go if anybody, Niki or Sally or George or Alan could go and they could find out if they've got a problem with anxiety or depression or ADHD or ADD like me, or OCD or post-traumatic PTSD or traumatic brain injury or whatever. They would find information about how to treat it naturally. And that was the genesis of Nootropics Expert. I just started writing. And here we are today. Now, during that time, I finally learned the word nootropics and where that came from. But yeah, that was my journey in getting to figuring out dietary supplements that help the human brain.
Yeah, that sounds like an incredible testament and journey. I mean, of resiliency to go through all those different hurdles. But I don't know, I try to remind myself or others going through difficult things that at the end, yes, you'll be stronger, but you'll have more knowledge. And clearly you've utilized that knowledge and expertise and experience to now help thousands, if not millions of others. And so I think there's a reason for all those things that we go through. And now look at the work that you're doing now. You know, one thing, and I guess I'm curious too, you mentioned your boss was talking about the lack of focus. Did you notice early on in your adolescence, the lack of focus, or do you think it was just such a normal thing that it just felt normal of who you were?
I think the latter. I just thought that's the way life was, that I would just have to struggle. I always got really good marks in school, but I really had to work at it to do that. I wonder what it would have been like if I had been diagnosed at ADD, when I was in my teens, but it didn't happen.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what I'd love to transition into is understanding neurotropics and even smart drugs. So for those of us who are new to this space, I'd love to clarify what we're talking about when we say neurotropics.
Okay. Nootropics are just dietary supplements that help the human brain. There's other names for it, like cognitive enhancers and stuff like that. I make a distinction between nootropics and smart drugs because smart drugs are things like that you have to get a prescription to get, and you got to go to the pharmacy to get it. Nootropics are natural. You don't need a prescription. You can go to any vitamin shop or Whole Food store in the world and buy the majority of these supplements. Ritalin and Adderall and modafinil are not nootropics. They're smart drugs.
Great. Yep. Perfect. I appreciate that clarification. Now, I really want to spend the time today focusing on one in particular, and that's going to be vinpocetine. So it's an ingredient I know you're very passionate about and one that has some impressive brain health benefits. I'd love to just lay that out, what it is, where it comes from, how it's used, pretty much everything, the need to know basis.
Okay. That's one of my favorite supplements. I've been using it 3 times a day for, since I've learned about it like 12 years ago or something. Vinpocetine is an extract of the lesser periwinkle plant, vincamine, and it was a guy named Sabasente, who was a chemist in 1975. He's the one that isolated vincamine, and then a Hungarian pharmaceutical company called Getty and Richter began manufacturing vinpocetine in 1978. And vinpocetine actually continues to be the best-selling drug that company has, and it is a prescription drug in Japan, in Europe, in Mexico, and Russia for treating cognitive and cerebrovascular disorders or blood flow disorders in the brain in places like Canada and the United States. It's over-the-counter supplement. So that's where vinpocetine came from.
Now, you mentioned the vincamine. I think that's how it's pronounced. Is
Yes.
that the active constituent, or is vinpocetine the active constituent of the periwinkle plant?
Vincamine is a semisynthetic derivative. Vinpocetine is a semisynthetic derivative of vincamine, which is from the lesser periwinkle plant.
Gotcha. Now, I know the beauty of so many herbs is they have so many different benefits. We have vinpocetine in our incontinence formula, so that's bladder leakage. It really helps make the mind-to-body connection. But we also have it in our clarity formula, so our brain support formula. Obviously, we're discussing brain health. And we'll probably do a deep dive into those 2 categories. But are there other known benefits of vinpocetine outside of the traditional brain health?
Well, that's a good question. They've been using it in Europe for a couple of other things, but it's primarily for cognitive disorder.
Well, and that's why I know we put it in that incontinence formula, because sometimes the neurotransmitters aren't making the connection to the rest of the brain to say, hold in your bladder, or you need to, use the restroom. And so I can see how it's more of like a secondary product.
I just found it.
Okay.
It is used off-label for things like motion sickness, menopause symptoms, chronic fatigue syndrome, seizure disorders, hearing and eye disorders, and even as a topical application to increase female sexual response.
Okay. Yeah, I think that makes sense. It's telling the brain, something to do or what not to do. So that makes sense. Now, as far as brain support goes, could you explore kind of the science of what's happening? I know earlier you discussed some of the certain scientific mechanisms in our brain. What is actually vinpocetine acting on? What's happening?
It does a couple of different things. The primary one is we use it for cerebral blood flow, or increasing blood flow in the brain. And it does that by inhibiting PDE1. You may be familiar with PDE5, which is what is in erectile dysfunction drugs like Cialis and Viagra. This is PDE1. So it works in a similar manner. That goes on to increase a thing called CAMP and CGMP. And they're cyclic nucleotides that activate kinases that phosphorylate the transcription factors, they affect plasticity-related genes. And these plasticity-related genes are what boosts the neuroplasticity that helps with blood flow.
Okay. And for those listening, neuroplasticity, what is that and why is that something that we want more of?
Your brain is dynamic. We use neuroplasticity for memory, for example. When you're creating a memory, you're growing a new neural network. And so we need neuroplasticity in our brain for growing new neurons, for repairing broken neurons, for repairing damaged receptors and axons and dendrites and synapses. Anything that we can do to boost neuroplasticity is going to help.
Okay, fantastic. And for those that may be listening or curious about, starting with Vinpocetine, as far as some like practical applications, what types of people or even concerns would Vinpocetine be most suitable for?
Anybody that wants to increase blood flow in their brain. Now, it's interesting because you would think that just older people have problems with blood flow. But when you survey, I always write a section in my individual supplement reviews called "How Does Something Feel?" And I get that not from clinical studies, but by reading user reviews. Mm. And the neurohackers report that Vinpocetine reduces brain fog and mental fatigue. Most experience improved focus, memory, and even improved sense of well-being. It has an effect on short, working, and long-term memory, so that you can remember things like names, phone numbers, and life events and stuff. And so it doesn't matter if you work or at school. Vinpocetine can help with things like learning and memory. And you should be able to start noticing the difference within a week of taking it.
Fantastic. And I think sometimes people aren't aware of the benefits of improving your blood flow. They might think, especially cerebral blood flow, they're like, okay, well, what is that going to do? But to all the different benefits that you mentioned, your blood carries your cells, your oxygen, your nutrients. And so the more readily available we can have these to the different areas of the body, the higher functioning everything is going to work. So Vinpocetine, along with so many other, blood flow supports, are going to be incredibly beneficial. In your research, is there, and I know we put it in our formula, so I have particular ingredients, but what have you found Vinpocetine combines really well with some other ingredients?
Anything.
Okay.
I find that you can add Vinpocetine to any nootropic stack and it's going to help it. Think about blood flow in your brain for a minute. Your brain is what, 2 or 3 pounds? The size of your brain compared to the rest of your body is small, but the amount of blood that it uses is amazing. The adult brain gets about 1/7 of your heart's output of blood every minute. And so that delivers glucose, which is a sugar, and oxygen and other nutrients to keep your brain working properly. And if that blood flow slows down, then your brain cannot get the oxygen and nutrients and the glucose that it needs to function well. So we need blood flowing going into our brain, circulating around our brain, and then flowing out of our brain to take the garbage and toxins back out again. And that's got to be optimized if we want our brain working properly. If your blood is not flowing the way it's supposed to, things are not going to work as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We have at LifeSeasons, we have a cognitive support called Clarity. And my way of explaining it to consumers is you think about these cords that plug into the wall. And if the cords aren't plugging in, the light bulb doesn't turn on. And so I like to explain, like, Clarity helps make those cord connections. And so it is really good for the memory, the focus, remembering people's names, reducing the brain fog. I'm curious if you have any thoughts on some of these other ingredients that we combine with our Vinpocetine: huperzine A, ginger, phosphatidylserine, ginkgo, and bacopa. Have you seen certain studies on the combination of some of those ingredients?
Honestly, I have not. They may exist, but what I've discovered in my years and years of research, it's not often that somebody's willing to spend the money on a clinical study to test the combination of 2 natural supplements. It's because clinical studies are so ridiculously expensive.
Yeah. Yep. That's one thing that we found. And that's really where we do try to dedicate a lot of our time, is to put money into these so that we can prove and validate that this stuff works. But to your point, it's incredibly expensive, and it's, it takes a lot of time to develop these as well. So, anything else revolved around vinpocetine that you feel like listeners should walk away with, whether that's where it's harvested, how it's harvested, the amount and frequency of which we can use it in a day?
Well, I think let's talk about the benefits of it for a little bit first, more, because it does more than just increase brain blood flow. It also is a very, very potent anti-inflammatory. And it's been shown in clinical studies to help prevent things like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's.
Okay.
So if somebody is got genetically predisposed to either Parkinson's or Alzheimer's or dementia, if there's some in your family, you might want to take a look at vinpocetine just to stop it from happening to you. The neuroscience gets pretty complicated, and it's probably not appropriate to go into that, but amyloid beta is one well-known protein that leads to the upregulation of interleukins and tumor necrosis factor A that can lead to things like Alzheimer's, and vinpocetine stops that from happening, which is kind of a big deal.
Yeah, that's huge. I think we do a lot of work with Dr. Dale Bredesen, who's one of the top neurologists in the country. And he talks about these factors and how a lot of times some of these medications that we're giving to some of these patients with Alzheimer's and dementia, we're just putting a Band-Aid over them, instead of actually looking at the root source of where this is happening and taking certain ingredients or lifestyle factors to reduce it naturally instead of kind of doing this Band-Aid component.
Vinpocetine has also been tested for helping with stroke recovery.
How so? Just the blood flow increase?
Increasing blood flow to specific parts of the brain that particularly suffer during stroke.
Yeah.
I've got a couple links to a couple of studies on my website, and that's pretty important too. I mean, the only other supplement that I'm aware of where I remember there's clinical studies specifically that help with stroke recovery is alpha-lipoic acid.
Yeah, I can imagine you increase the blood flow, you getting more nutrients to the areas of the body to help recover, rejuvenate. And
it does it in a hurry, right? I mean, vinpocetine works the first time you take it. It doesn't have to build up, and there's no loading or anything. It's just typically the dosage is 10 milligrams 3 times a day. So you take vinpocetine and you start within 20 minutes, it starts increasing blood flow in your brain.
Okay. And so that's a traditional dosage is 10 milligrams.
10 milligrams 3 times a day.
Fantastic. We do 20 milligrams in our Clarity formula. So that's good to know whether you want to take that once a day or split up the capsules as well. So yeah, that's good to know. I know some of these herbs, it's 120 milligrams or 400 milligrams. So 10 or 20 might seem small, but you really got to look at the ingredient and, what is that equivalent? Because that is a therapeutic dose in there.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Anything else that you feel like listeners should know about vinpocetine or just brain health in general?
I've got studies on, if you want to check out my article on my website, vinpocetine improves memory. This was done with 12 healthy female volunteers. They were treated with 40 milligrams of vinpocetine 3 times a day or a placebo. And on day 3 of the study, 1 hour following morning dosage of vinpocetine, the women completed a battery of psychological tests. The study found that those who used vinpocetine had a significant improvement in memory when compared to placebo.
Fantastic. I love that. And again, putting money into the clinical studies does, show a benefit because we're able to see these types of results.
And vinpocetine is one of the most studied natural compounds on the planet. It's actually used as a research compound.
What do you mean by that?
You compare other drugs to it.
Oh, okay. So it's kind of like that drug's placebo? Maybe not placebo, but...
No, it is. Does this thing that we're developing as a drug work? Does it work like vinpocetine, or does it provide the same benefit as vinpocetine does because it's so effective?
Wow. That's neat to know. That's very cool. Now, I know you cover so many different other neurotropics on your website. And, for those interested in learning more about your work, David, and exploring all these other nootropics, where can they find you?
A couple of ways. Nootropicsexpert.com is an easy way to find me, or YouTube. That's my website, nootropicsexpert.com. You can go to YouTube and just type in nootropics or nootropics expert or David Tomen, and I'll pop up on the front page of the search results. You can search for my book, Head First, the second edition, which came out last year, which is available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and Apple Books and in Walmart. And it's available literally all over the world. So it's 962 pages, and it's a repair manual for your brain.
So you might need to get yourself some Vinpocetine prior to reading it. That's a lengthy book, but probably tons of information.
It's not something that you want to read cover. It's not meant to be read cover to cover. It's basically like a reference manual. It's got an index in it and a table of contents, and so you can look up specific things very easily.
Fantastic.
But it's easy to find me.
Yep. Perfect. Before we wrap up, I want to remind our listeners about the special offer we have for you guys. And you can use the code Nootropics Expert, NOOTROPICS Expert, to get 15% off your first order. Again, we have Vinpocetine in our women's security, which is our incontinence formula. So if you struggle with bladder leakage, this is not just a women's related issue, it's men's as well. And then we also have it in Clarity, our brain support formula, which is incredible. And you add up all the ingredients in this formulation. If you buy those ingredients separately, you're spending 3-4 times the amount compared to what you're getting in this formula. It is a powerful formula to help with everything that David mentioned: memory, recall, reducing the brain fog, improving the cerebral blood flow. It's an incredible, incredible product. But David, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your expertise and insight on Vinpocetine and your story of how you got here and just kind of normalizing all these, hills and valleys that we go through in life, but ultimately to lead us to where we are and the value and purpose that we can give back. So thank you so much for being here.
I'm glad. Thank you for having me. I'm glad we've been working on doing this for months, and we finally got around to doing it. So thank you for your persistence.
Oh, absolutely. No, I think it's important to talk about these things. And so I just appreciate your time and expertise on the conversation.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Of course. All right. Take care.
Take care.